This is the After the Glass Break series, and I'm your host, David Harrison. Throughout this series, we'll take a candid look through the lenses of culturally diverse technology leaders to discuss their rise through the glass ceiling and what happened immediately after the glass breaks. Today's guest is Mel Kirk, Chief Technology Officer, Ryder System, Inc. Mel, welcome to the ride.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here. David.
So glad to have you on today. We're going to take a nice journey. We want to take the audience through some of the things you experienced as a kid, some of the things you experienced in your college career, and then get into your professional career and get a better understanding of all of the glass ceilings that you went through during that time frame, and have them really relate to some of the stories that we're going to learn and that beautiful picture behind you, which I'm always going to be focused on throughout this. And and for my audience, if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're not, you should. The picture is outstanding. So, Mel, where'd you grow up, my friend?
Well, Mel Kirk, I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. I am hail from the same place as Mr. James Brown.
Nice.
And, I sometimes humbly refer to myself as number 9. I'm the 9th kid in a family of 11. And, I grew up in the, late 60s, early 70s around Augusta. And as the 9th of 11, I took a few beatings from time to time from the bigger siblings, but learned and grew from being in a big family.
Very nice. 9. Wow. Yeah, 8 siblings. That's a very big family. So socioeconomically, what was the effect of that? What was the environment you grew up in?
You know what? It's interesting, right? And that my remembrance is that we never wanted for anything, right? So, the question about socioeconomic, I look back now and I'm assuming we would have been low income. My mother remarried a military veteran, and she was a nurse, and they provided for all of us. And we never, we had those days where it was, mayonnaise sandwiches and bologna sandwiches and things like that. But it never felt like we were hard pressed, at least to me, because there was always a meal on the table. And, between my stepfather going in the refrigerator and creating something out of leftovers from 5 days, we always had enough. And we were mostly outside kids. So, we were in Georgia, we ate fruit off trees and things like that. And we went to our friend's house to eat and stuff like that. So, low income family, a lot of us. I'm going to jump forward just a little bit because I just want to give you some context on why I'm not struggling with, but why I'm thinking about this as low income. When I went to college and we had to fill out the financial aid forms, that was the first time that I had ever seen how much or how little money that my mom was managing this household on. Right. And I was blown away by the fact that she was able to engineer a happy household, a well-fed household off of scraps, basically. I mean, between her nursing income and the military income, there wasn't a lot. And that when I got to college and I just happened to see the paperwork and I happened to see the numbers, I think my scholarship was more than their annual income. Just
wow. Yeah. And that like I mentioned it before, I didn't know I was poor either. I didn't know. And that's because, like you said, there was always love and there was always food. And then everyone in my neighborhood seemed to be the same as I was. So I didn't know till I was poor until they, were of similar ages, until they bust us to the north side of town. And I saw that side of the world and I realized that, hey, we're poor. So That's very interesting. So what was the neighborhood like? Were you exposed to anyone in corporate America in your neighborhood, or, what was the general demographics around you?
No, all working class. So in
Mhm.
the house that my mom is still in today is the house that I fundamentally grew up in, even though we lived in a couple of places before. So we landed in that home when I went to fourth grade, I think.
Mm.
And so we were there the rest of the time. And we had a family. So our family was on one street. On the street behind us, there was another family that had 11, 12, 13 kids. So we were the two anchor houses because it was so many kids across so many ages. So everybody would, and they had a pool and we had a big football backyard.
Oh, nice.
So it was either their yard or our yard. But all the parents, they were working class. They were, there was a nuclear power plant. The good thing is that there was a decent amount of industrial work in the area. So people worked in some of the plants there as laborers. They did, service level jobs and things and of the like. A big medical center, the Medical College of Georgia is in Augusta. And so my mom, like others, worked in nursing or in the medical support capacity. So we bounced from house to house. You could get food in another house. You get a whooping. You get a whooping. So it was, it was a nice, warm, loving community. Nurtured all of us, and it was happy. We, both. It was interesting, right? Growing up in a family of 11, and so there's 5 years between me and my youngest brother, and then 5 between him and my youngest sister. And so for 5 years, I was the baby,
right?
And I was a crybaby, and I was mama's boy. And so, man, there were days when my brothers and sisters would grind on me, man,
Yeah.
and I would tell on them, David. I would tell them. So,
wow.
So
I say I wasn't brave enough.
Man, they would grind on me, and they would, we would. It felt early on like my brothers and sisters would pick on me, call me names and stuff like that. I was sensitive to it at the time because it felt like, oh man, they're always picking on me because I was telling on them all the time too, right? But they wouldn't let the community do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was like, no, we can pick on little Mel, but you can't pick on little Mel. So it was interesting. I grew up, being toughened up by my brothers and sisters and protected externally at the same time, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, it's circling the wagons, right? I was the youngest in my family, so my older brother and cousins, they were big wrestling fans, and so I was the wrestling dummy. They tried all the new wrestling moves out on me, and we couldn't tell, right? If me or I had a cousin that was in pretty close to my age, and if we told, the beatings would get worse. So
Yep.
So that's interesting. So take me through. So with that many siblings, what was the ethic around school, and what was the driving force for you within that household?
My mom worked evenings. My stepfather was home because he was retired, and we all had to go to school. And I remember. So if you go through and you look, the older kids through to when you get closer to the brother that's 1 year older than me and so forth, we were all actually good in school. We didn't all like school. So the older they were, they didn't like school. They could do it, but there were other things going on in the world they wanted to participate in. So my oldest, so if you kind of, one of my early managers kind of helped me see this one day. But he asked me about my family, and he said, well, what do they do? And I said, okay, this brother went to Job Corps. This sister had to leave. Her and her boyfriend got pregnant. They went off they had a child and got married. So I went through everybody. And so we had a couple of brothers that got involved in drugs, either selling or taking. And then, as you kind of get further down, the brother older than me, he went to college. Then I went to college. The younger brother went to college and military, and then the younger sister went to college. So the manager at the time, he said, because there was something going on in my family. I can't remember exactly what, but I went to him because I was going to take some vacation time, and he just said he knew I was upset about whatever the issue was at home. And he had me walk through the family and what everybody did and how everybody progressed. And he said, you know what? And this is a middle-aged white guy. And he said to me, Mel, your family is statistically normal. And I'm like, huh? Well, yeah, you just like everybody else. You got a few problems. You got a couple that's doing that's excelling and da-da-da-da. And it gave me perspective. And it calmed me. So, mom always pressed, do your work, do your homework. I think with me, and I think the youngest, probably 4 of us, we had the benefit of watching the challenges that our older siblings had. So we focused a lot. We could sidetrack some of the things that took them off path. But I think we also probably enjoyed school more and did extremely well.
Very nice. That is an interesting dynamic, because it also peels back the layers of onions that you can see, and you can mimic what actually happens in the real world, because you're seeing it really play out in front of you in the family infrastructure, right? So there's always decisions, and those decisions that you make, whether big or small, the flap of a butterfly wings, those decisions can really derail or put you back on the rails of a successful, or what is viewed as a successful life to share, right? So let's talk about the decision for you to actually, leave that environment and decide that, hey, college is something that I want to do. It sounds like from a family infrastructure, there was multiple dynamics at play here. So what made you decide to make that move? And then what was the to me, that's like the first class ceiling we go through, is that decision point of coming out of high school. And so what were some of the support structure around you that made you thought this is the way you wanted to go? And then secondarily, how did you decide to push and go that direction?
So first of all, my older brothers were bigger, stronger, tougher than me. I was anemic for growing up. I had an iron deficiency, so I was smaller and weaker and so forth. By the time I got to junior high and high school, we had offset that, and I was able to play sports at a very high level and so forth. But I was nowhere near as tough as those guys, and I'd seen how the world had just beat them down. So I was fortunate between the 9th and 10th grade, I think it was either 8th and 9th or 9th and 10th, I was selected to participate in a Richmond, what they called the county's enrichment program. And they took about 12 to 15 minority students. And really was it all African-American? It was ethnic minorities, but I think we were all African-American students on the verge of going to high school. And it was essentially a STEM program, not called that at the time, but it was essentially that. So we were all good in math and science. And for about 8 weeks over the summer, they gave us some coursework at the local university. So we anchored at the local university. They gave us some, math and science and physics and so forth work, or not physics, but algebra and a couple other things. But more importantly, they took us on field trips to Georgia Tech, Clemson, University of Georgia, I think Georgia Southern as well. And then they took us to several different industrial facilities. So the Savannah River Nuclear Plant, We went to a paper mill, and a couple other 4 other facilities. I think one day we went mining for gold in the hills of North Georgia. But we met engineering students, scientists, mathematicians over the course of this 8-week period. And through that experience, I found out what an engineer was, and I knew I wanted to be an engineer at that point. It was just a matter of after that summer, it was what type of engineer. I think through that program as well, I always did good in school. I was always an A, top of the class kind of person. And it always felt like a given, right? It wasn't like I was sitting there trying to be the top student in the class. It was just innate and natural. And I loved learning and always excelled. And so through that program, though, I got focused around, I gained some level of focus around, oh, this is what I could be. And through that, I recognized that there was no way we were going to pay for me to go to college. So from there forward, it became a journey to get some funding to go to college. And that was what the next 3 years or so was about. I continued, I excelled in football and basketball and track, and thought about going through I wanted, as I went into high school, I wanted the opportunity at the end of the junior year to be able to make a determination, have a choice of whether or not I wanted an athletic scholarship or a academic scholarship. So that's what the journey from 9th grade was about.
Very nice. And we've said it before here, and I'll continue to say it because it's so important. It really only takes one, right? To expose you to another world and give you a different lens. They cannot be what they cannot see. So that exposure was important for you, and it gave you visibility. I've said it before. In my high school, it was my physics teacher a chemistry teacher that was like, you should be an engineer. And I thought it was a slight because I grew up in Georgia as well. I grew up on the east side of Georgia, the west side of Georgia, not the east side of Georgia. So CSX was the big thing, right? It was railroads. So I'm thinking he's telling me that I should drive trains for a living. And I took offense. I'm like, well, why would you say that? Like, it's got to be other things I can do. And no offense to that profession, because it is an admirable profession. But, I'm like, it's got to be other things I can do that can be contributing to the side. And he literally set me down and took me through what an actual engineer was. And it was eye-opening. And the same thing that you said, once you realized it, I never deviated from the path. I knew, okay, this is what I want to be. And this is why I wanted to be that. So it only takes one to get exposure. Exposure and resources are the key here. And that's one of the things that I think gets lost in the struggles and the challenges, is that your environment makes up 90% of who you are. It takes the 10% that are brave to break what they see to get outside that and experience new things. So that is absolutely an awesome part of your story here. That exposure at that level, and you went to some great schools, by the way, to visit. Gave you some wherewithal, and then really put you on a path, right? And that you haven't wavered for. So let's move forward a little bit. So you're now in college. You're now being exposed to even more of the world than what you saw in Augusta. Help me understand, as you're coming through, what made you think that corporate America would be a place where you can excel?
It was interesting. So I got a scholarship. I did get an academic scholarship to the University of Tennessee, and attached to that scholarship was a direct internship relationship with one of the local companies. So I actually I'm 17 years old going off to college, and the summer before I started my freshman year, I worked in this company called Robert Shaw Controls, which made automotive components or components for the automotive industry, thermostats, bellows, and other things. So they had a manufacturing facility, but they also had a foundry and other things. And so early on, getting into that environment and them challenging me with looking at their production line, their manufacturing line, and giving them ideas on how to improve it. Now, I haven't had a lick of any kind of education at this point, right? It's just take the 17-year-old kid that just showed up, one day, and just have him with fresh eyes look at how we're making these particular widgets and ask him for advice on how to produce it better, how to make the line more efficient. And they did that, but more importantly, they listened and engaged in the thoughts that I had. And that I wasn't using any principles of engineering at all. It was just logic, common sense from a boy that grew up breaking down and putting bicycles back together, rebuilding radios or something. So that let me know that my voice had value. And it also ignited the creativity of how do you look at the lowest, not the lowest level in terms of the lowest level of work, not in terms of the people doing the work, but the lowest level of the buildup of work, right? How do you look at it at its cellular level, evaluate it, and try to make it better? And I had chosen on my journey to be an industrial engineer. And that's what industrial engineers do, right? They look at people, processes, and technologies, the confluence of the three, and try to figure out how do you shape that relationship to make it optimal. And they listened to me as a 17-year-old with no core education, no engineering education at that point. And I didn't shy away. They say, hey, here's what I think, and we engaged, and from there forward, it's been a journey.
That is unbelievable. You said something in that content, and I'm going to really go in, because to me, I just heard your first glass ceiling, right? My voice has value.
Yep.
You realize that I could be a producer of something great, and my voice has value. That's kind of the first symbolic glass ceiling that you walk through, because within our infrastructure, if you will, coming up and growing up in the South as we did, typically our voices wasn't viewed as valuable, right? in certain settings. And the fact that at that young age, you realize that your voice had value, that allowed you to then break through that ceiling and realize, how can I take this value and make it even more valuable, right? So that is a great setup. I think that really is one of the key triggers for everyone in this role, is to understand, when did your voice gain value.
And let me add on to that, because I struggled with it. My voice always had value from the time that, if I go back as a kid, I had a lot of, because there was 11 of us, my mom and pop couldn't keep their hands on all of us. So we had a lot of independence. And so I grew up very independently, allowed myself to think for myself and so forth, or was allowed to make choices and think for myself. And I was always comfortable with the consequences because I made the decisions. But I was good with that for Melvin. I wasn't good with that for groups. So when I went to college, I had the one experience at my internship, but I also I was a part of a 33 group minority scholarship group. So there was 32 other minority students from around the country that were awarded scholarships to this program at the University of Tennessee. And we were a cohort, a group. And I'm the second youngest in this group. I think we're from all different states. And when we came together and we were making decisions about, hey, we want to study on that, we want to do this study group, or we want to go to this party or whatever. Early on, everybody would throw their thoughts in the discussion, and they'd say, okay, we're going to go left. And I would be like, okay, fine, I'll see you guys. I'm going to go over here to the right. Next thing you know, you slowly start to see the group saying, we're going to go now, And so I would say, no, don't go with me. I'm making a decision about me. It may suck over there, and I don't want the responsibility of you guys coming with me but after a while, I recognized there was something about my voice, the confidence at which I delivered it or something that people were comfortable moving with. And I rejected that because I didn't want to be responsible for nobody but me. And over a little while through because they started voting me to lead this organization or that organization, and I stopped fighting it and saying there's something about folks being comfortable with me leading that I'm going to accept. And that was hard for me.
Yeah.
I'm an introvert. An introvert by nature. I wanted to go in my corner, David.
Yeah.
But every time I went to my corner, somebody would follow me. That was hard.
But that's, again, that's another beautiful thing, because that means you're an innate leader, right? So we're all born with innate capabilities. And a lot of times we don't think those capabilities exist within us, but they do. We all, as humans, are born with innate capabilities. And it's up to us to realize what those innate capabilities are and how do we capitalize against those innate capabilities to make us great, right? We're unique for a reason. And that uniqueness needs to be understood and loved and affectionately grown within ourselves. So your innate ability to lead has manifested itself to where you are today, right? So that is a gorgeous and insightful moment for you. And then second glass ceiling, right? So my second one is my leadership, that people looked toward me to lead and I shied away for a while. And now I realize the importance of leading and why leading is so important. So that's awesome. So now we're coming out of college, and now it's time to make the decision. So you're now out. You're now starting your professional career. What was that like?
It was so I went to Merck at the time, America's most admired corporation, great pharmaceutical company, and I was like just proud to be chosen by a company like that, right? And I went there, and we had a small industrial engineering group, and I learned a valuable lesson. So my job is to go onto a production facility and, again, to try to figure out how to improve a work operation. And I was doing time studies. And so some of the audience may know about doing time studies, where you watch people performing work. You're both timing them and evaluating their effort to try to figure out what the work standard should be. So I went down to this production floor, and mind you, these are 20, 30 year, production professionals, right? They're a labor union and it's a pharmaceutical union. And so I go down bebopping on this, 20-something-year-old engineer, black engineer. And I go down and I time this gentleman, and they said, "What's the rate?" And I tell them the rate. What will the new standard be? And it was going to be tighter than what they were doing before, right? And the person that I timed said, "Yeah, you're wrong. Your whole method is wrong." So they called the union steward over. Union steward comes over, and we're debating. And I said to him, the steward, I said, "No." I listened intently to what their opinions were. I said, "I can modify this, I can do this, but I do feel like this is a fair rate." The union steward jumped all over me. Fair? What does fair mean? Fair to whom? Fair to you? Fair to him? Fair to the company? who are you scoring this for? And I was like, he's got a point. He's got a point. It's a matter of perspective. And so we could have stayed there for 3 days and we would have never been on the same page because his perspective of fair was different from mine. And so this is, how do you now navigate to agree to disagree? Because you're never going to be in alignment because your perspectives are slightly different. Your objectives, the objective is the same, the perspective is different. And that taught me a lesson about perspective, but also the choice of words that you use in terms of talking to people about challenging stuff. Because I don't know if he was laying in wait for me to say fair, but he sure jumped on it because he was right. And and I was like, because if I would have said, I'm doing this for the company, I'm a company employee and I'm doing the best rate for the company, and he would have had an angle to beat me with there. And so I just kind of said, okay, I'm going to stand by the rate. This is what I did. And I just talked process from there on, right? Process and procedure from there on, not about opinion or any other perspective related stuff, but it had to be black and white. And that stayed with me. And even how I talk to people today, I always think about what perspective are they listening from, which has helped me be a good leader, and it helped me be a good facilitator. Because you have to get to the feet of the people that you're trying to move to understand how to help them move. Not to move them, but how to help them move.
Very nice. That is that in itself speaks that your level of maturity, and I think that's because you grew up in such a big family and you were exposed to much more mature individuals because they were much older than you. That accelerate your level of maturity than most 20-plus-year-olds coming out of college. Because I'm the youngest of four, and my oldest is 5 years older than me, and so we were relatively close. And then he was my oldest brother was typically off with his friends for the most part. So my sisters are 2 and 4 and 3 years older than me, so we're relatively close. So I wasn't exposed to the great lengths that you were and could see things a little different. So, and most of us are not, right? So that level of maturity really helped define you at a very early age. So let's go to your junior executive time frame. So now you're moving into a director, senior director's chair. What was that like for you? And how did you get there?
Let me take one other step, because I think there's something important to jump from entry level to management, and me now having, to your point, innate leadership skills. So I was given opportunities to lead, but one of the things that I was conscious of was I was a very young looking. I was relatively young anyway, right? But I was very young looking African American male that was in a very senior, long tenured pharmaceutical company with mostly white men and women, that I was being asked to either influence or directly lead. And so, David, I gained weight and I grew my face to give the appearance of being older.
Wow.
Because even in that discussion with the union manager, what they saw was a kid, probably smart, but a kid that was coming out of college with all these fresh college ideas, but never had done anything. Right. But in reality, I had been working for the last 5 years in that automotive plant in Knoxville. So I did have some stuff, right? I was coming with some level of experience, right? In addition to the education. But what they saw was, and what I knew they saw was young, smart, up and coming, high potential, blah, 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 here to do this for 6 months and get promoted. And so I wanted to So I camouflaged myself. I'm a little older, right? The problem with that, David, is it's hard to get the weight back off.
It's very difficult.
But I did. I consciously changed my look to look more mature and try to get past that whole thing of this young kid, high potential, trying to come in here and change the world. And I don't know. I don't know if it had the effect or not. I still made progressions and so forth. So then jumping into that directorship and group director type role, one of the most important things. So at this point, I had gone to grad school and then I worked for a little while with General Mills, and then now I'm with General Electric. And when I got to General Electric, I was hired because General Electric, that's when Jack Welch and his team wanted to expand. They wanted to take Lean Six Sigma from the manufacturing operations into their financial services company. And so I had done that in some other venues. And so they hired me as a master black belt to do that. And so I basically came in as a specialist of sorts for a very particular project for the company.
Right.
And had a lot of success doing it, and then was asked to do a couple of other things. But what had started to happen for me was because I was always doing special projects, I was on the periphery of the normal development chain.
Right.
And so when there was conversations about who's going to be the next regional director for this part of the business, the central part of the business, they would talk about me, and then they would excuse me out because I didn't come up through the chain. And so I was being handicapped in a way because I wasn't in the chain. I didn't look like everybody else, and I didn't hang out with everybody else. And the work that I was doing was always unique and special. So that by virtue also kept me separated from the core. So that was a challenge. And I had to find a way, even though everybody liked, loved, Mel, whatever, appreciated the work that I did on all these special projects. And they always talked about me as, somebody that can grow in a company. But they always found a reason why I shouldn't be in the main line. So what I ended up having to do was I recognized that I wasn't a cocktail party guy. I would go, but I wasn't the person that was going to use that to propel myself. I wasn't going to go sit right next to the divisional president and chum it up or whatever. It just wasn't in my personality set. And I also wasn't going to hog a internal meeting to make myself look good. So when I did go to the cocktail parties or any of these other professional events, I would actually introduce myself. And if the divisional president or anybody higher up would say, "Hey, you should get on my calendar and come see me," blah 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 blah, most people wouldn't do it. Right? They're just saying that. I'm not going to get on the. What would I talk to them about? If they were crazy enough to invite me, I was crazy enough.
You don't have to take it.
So the next day, David, I was calling the admin saying I talked to such and such, and he said I should come see him. I'd like to get on his calendar. Really? And the admin is used to shielding and saying, well, he was not really serious. Yeah. but I would press on, and so invariably I was able to get the one-on-one meetings that were a byproduct of that one-off conversation in the session, because I felt like for me to be successful, for me to get the type of attention I needed to play on my turf. And I felt like if I can have a one-on-one conversation with anybody, I can win that discussion. I could help you understand why you should be wanting me to grow in your organization. So I went and I got those meetings, and those meetings with the divisional president and so forth and so on. And they all ended up with them saying that there were two important outcomes. One, it changed the discussion about me for those roles that were in the core of the business. And then two, when I did take those larger roles, if something happened and my boss said, well, it was Mel that did it. Mel was thinking blah, blah, blah. There were people 2-3 levels up that knew me to my core that could say, that don't sound like Mel Kirk. So I was not only creating an opportunity for me to get discussed in the line discussions about new roles, but I was also building protection for myself because I saw in a company like when you get into large corporate settings, it's people people fighting to get up the line. So I was building myself some protection around, because I know I'm very quiet. I'm very quiet. I'm not gonna, I will talk on a professional basis, but I choose who I get to know me, kind of thing.
Right.
And so if anything came up sideways in a talent discussion about Mel Kirk, there was 2-3 people in the room that could say, that don't sound like Mel Kirk. That's not how he thinks. Matter of fact, we just talked about that last week in a session. So gave me some protections too.
Very nice. So what I'm hearing is that you learn how to manage up. Yep. and that is again, it does go back to your maturity as well, because typically we tend to try to manage horizontally and build alliances to the next of us versus managing up and understanding the importance. And this is what networking is all about. And this is where our peers have mastered that capability, that we're still learning that capability needs to be a part of your repertoire. If you want to move up the chain, is that you must manage up and not manage horizontally. We're comfortable where we sit. We're typically uncomfortable looking up. And that makes it very difficult for us to climb. So let's get to where you are right now. So you've gone through, you broke quite a few glass ceilings here on your way up here. I've been that individual contributor and was very great in my silo, but I never was, it was hard to jump and get back into the core business as a director. So I went up to, chief architect on mine because I was really good in technology, but it was hard to get back over there once I left and got specialized. And so I did figure out a way to get back over there, a little bit different than your way, but nonetheless. But when I got to that C-suite infrastructure, I realized that some of the business practices I didn't know. Yeah. And that left me with a little bit of vulnerability in that new role that I took on, because I can talk to you all day technically about how things should go, but I didn't understand what was the business factors that drove it and what were some of the underlying issues that you had to solve operationally to be successful. So when you got to that next level, how did that work for you? Now you're in the cockpit. Now you're seeing all the buttons and dials and switches. What was the operational lens you saw? And then what were some of the things that you're like, okay, I get that, but I don't get that. What was those feelings as you moved there?
For me, it wasn't as awestruck from the content of trying to understand how the business runs and so forth wasn't like a huge shock for me because of where I started from. Remember, I started learning work at the ground level. And so whether I was in pharmaceuticals or automotive or consumer products and I always looked at the world from the work process standpoint, right? And so when I was then, given the opportunity to work in the C-suite, I can actually sit in the room and listen to the senior HR, and understand exactly what their challenges are. And I could listen to marketing and so forth. So I actually felt very comfortable in the room around the discussion and the decisions. And I was very comfortable adding my voice. The thing that blew me away was really more around the technology. I mean, not so much, not understanding technology, but the size and impact, the size and potential impact of all of the decisions related to technology. You know, if you're talking about making a decision about, do you build you've been building for 40 years this in-house infrastructure to support all of your operations. You've been, internally developing your own business applications. And now you've got to make the decision of, for the sake of efficiency and growth, stepping outside and using a commercial package, or investing in cloud infrastructure and so forth. I mean, these are big decisions, both financially and strategically. And that for me was the thing I was glad to be the man in the ring, making the decision, having the study. But those are hard decisions. I said to the CEO, our CEO, that, I will always bring to you the guts of all of the building blocks to make the decision, and I will give you my view and opinion on the decision. But man, I respect the heck out of the fact that you're having to look out on this and on the impact of these things for 10, 15 years. And you not only have the operational impact, but you also got the market performance of the company and market facing performance of the company in hand. That was what for me was the size and the breadth and the impact of the decisions around technology, man. That's something huge.
Yeah.
But I did feel like if you can make that decision and learn business operations, you can run a company. Because the hardest decisions are technology. The hardest analytical, technical decisions are around the technologies. Coming from a guy that's built his life around operations.
Yeah, and what you said is kind of a good stepping off point, because what you just mentioned are things that we've always said. It's a different thing to be sitting in first class and understanding and seeing versus sitting behind the actual in the pilot seat to run the business. And that is a different experience. That is a different thought process. And what you just mentioned was exactly the runway you need. You need to understand the entirety of how things flow together. And when you're in that boardroom and listening and hearing how everything flows together, and then how decisions impact, right? A lot of times we get paralyzed and wanting to make decisions because we think the impacts will cause harm to us. And we're not thinking about what those impacts will cause harm to from a business standpoint. So it's hard to get in that cockpit because you have to make those decisions in order to fly the plane. So this has been an absolutely awesome ride, Mel. I mean, this has been fabulous, my friend. I appreciate your candid responses. I appreciate you taking us through. I love the picture. I got to figure out where you got that from. I love that, man. I'm going to leave the audience with this. Again, they can't be what they can't see. We just went on a complete journey where Mel expressed some of the ability for him to have some forward-looking thought that will give him capabilities and have his ability to rise throughout the glass ceiling. He's gone through quite a bit. He's been a great co-host here on the show. Mel, I do appreciate it. And thank you again for joining me on the ride.
Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, sir.